Negative interactions with police has been a long-standing issue in Australian football. It's something that needs to improve, particularly at A-League level, if we want the World Game to reach its potential in this country. You may have seen a recent Suited and Booted episode where they interview former police officer James Casser. In it, they talk about the issues that plague the relationship between the two parties. James had a few suggestions for everyday fans as to how they could help the situation, which we'll get into here, but also highlighted the role the media plays holding law enforcement to account. Now, we are not the media, and our audience represents even just a small portion of the national football audience, and you'll likely be agreeing with everything we have to say. But we're going to follow James's suggestion anyway and do what we can to bring the issue into the light of day and help empower you to do the same on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Tonight, I'm joined by Christian Montagan Paletti and Jacob Stevens. Guys, it's a bit of a serious tone today, so I'm going to forgo the usual introductions, although, Christian, a small mention to say welcome back. We know you've been away for a little while, but this is an issue that we've talked about in bits and pieces as incidents have come up. And Christian, I guess I'll kick it off with you. There was a lot in this interview that I guess the regular football fan might find pretty confronting, I guess, some of the things he had to say. And just as how bad, I guess, the kind of ingrained mentality of some police officers can be.
Yeah, I've got a chance to listen back to the interview. It was really well conducted, I thought. Ex-cop really, you know, spewed out his thoughts and, obviously from his past experience being an ex-cop and being in the thick of, that type of environment. And I think fans or active supporters listening to that podcast episode could definitely relate to a lot of the stuff that was being said. Something that really caught me and surprised me was the fact that he said that there were some police officers he knew that actually intend to pick fights. I mean, that struck me as absolutely bizarre.
Yeah.
If we've got that situation going on, then what are we actually doing? Is the APL stepping in? Are they being aware of what's happening here? So, I mean, this you have to assume has been going on for years, right? And to have, just someone right now recently coming out saying all these things that's been happening behind the scenes without us really knowing 100%. I know there definitely would be rumors behind the scenes, and you've had fans saying, "Oh, this is happening. The cops aren't treating us right." But then you've got a section of fans saying, "Oh, well, those active supporters are probably doing it to themselves in terms of their fan behavior and whatnot," because essentially the general public would probably believe more the police side of it because that's who we trust, right? I mean, they're the defense force; they're supposed to be protecting us, and so to have these allegations come to light, I think it definitely does paint a bigger picture and an important picture that perhaps we need to have a rethink about how we actually are treating our active support. For me personally, I do think, seeing a lot of stuff on social media, I think even last season you had that situation, if you guys remember, about the Brisbane Roar, and how the police treated them in a couple of those games. And there was a couple of outrages there from active fans from Brisbane saying, like, this isn't right how we're being treated by the police. Like, it does make sense now to hear all this stuff. And yeah, it is quite concerning.
Now, Paletti, I saw you raise your eyebrows in the middle there. I want to make one clarification before I let you respond to that. Christian, you said that most public, trust the police and what they do. I think an important distinction there is that they trust how the media reacts and reports on what the police do, right? Police around the world don't have the best relationships with people, full stop. We've seen that, around the world in America as well, particularly in the last 5 years or so. But, one of the things that James said was that the media has a really large role to play in holding police to account. And Paletti, it goes that a lot of the big media that a lot of the public see treats football in a negative light. We all know this, and a lot of the stories that come out about police are, the numbers of arrests that they make at football matches and then doing good work to keep people safe at football matches. We know that how that gets spins in terms of what actually happens in the ground. But that's a distinction I think I would like to make because the regular person on the street who's not a football fan doesn't exactly know what's going on.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it just, for me, it goes far beyond just being a football fan here. As someone who's had negative experiences with police at football games, also someone who's had negative experiences with police outside of football games, and I understand that not everyone goes through the experiences that I do as a queer person who's not exactly unvocal about who they are as a person, and that's a whole different topic of discussion that we're not going to get into tonight. But that's sort of why I raised my eyebrows, because it was just sort of like well, never really had that sort of relationship because I've always
Yep.
been a part of a minority, so to speak, which a lot of football fans are, whether that be race, gender, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the purpose of this discussion, but I think you do have that narrative, and when you see all these different things come out and you experience these sorts of things, it does tend to lead to a very negative sort of worldview, even though the general narrative is the police are the good guys, they're there to protect us, and unfortunately the reality couldn't be further from the truth.
Jacob, I haven't personally been a part of a lot of active support in football, a little bit here and there. So I've usually been at a distance from a lot of the issues that have been a part of the A-League. But one thing that James said in this interview really just clicked with me straight away and made a lot of sense. He was saying that throughout the 70s and 90s in Australia, the police had a big culture of really only letting in, men, white men who are over 6 feet tall and had that kind of intimidating look about them. And I think when we consider Australian football's history, back in kind of the post-war migration era and football being kind of an immigrant's game, at least that's how it was considered.
Yeah.
In those days of football infancy, I guess, in Australia, there was this big clash between immigrants coming over and bringing football with them to, for the lack of a better term, white Australia. And it's only as recent as kind of the early 20th century where we had a white Australia policy, and immigrants coming into Australia was very regulated. And so this isn't too far back in the big realms of human history. So when you match up the football of the history of Australian football with that phrase of police, you kind of leading towards white men, you can kind of understand where some of these biases would grow from. Now, that doesn't mean that they're completely at fault. Police, James admitted, are doing a lot to change, or at least they're trying to. We're probably yet to see a lot of the results of that come through, but it kind of provides a little bit more context as to why this may have happened.
Yeah, it sort of gives a background, I think, to the culture that's manifested within the police force in most states in Australia. I'd say probably across the country. Obviously, James was talking about specifically his experiences in New South Wales, but I'd hazard to guess that it's probably quite similar in most of the other states as well. And yeah, a big part of that, like you say, there, Lockie, is the sort of the racism aspect of it. And it's an unfortunate truth that Australia is an inherently very racist country. It has been for a long time, and it continues to be. You just have to look at the treatment of Aboriginal Australians as evidence of that. Even till today. So, it's the sad reality of the country that we live in, and it's found its way into these institutions here that are supposed to serve and protect the public and supposed to be in the best interests of the people. And Paletti touched quite nicely on why that's not necessarily the case pretty regularly, to be honest. Again, a big part of that is this sort of the remnants of white Australia that still exists within the police force, and what that did over time as well is cultivate a second thing, which I think is impacting the police force nowadays as well, which is sort of this hyper masculinity. And it's something that James did touch on as well, where it's this idea of you've got to be the right sort of person and the right sort of character to fit in the police force, or you'll be ostracized and you'll be left out, and then you'll probably end up leaving, right? And I've spoken to people who have been in the police force and stuff, and they've all said, yeah, I got out because I didn't fit in with the culture that was there, right? And yeah, a part of that is that you've got to be a real, big manly bloke. And he was saying that even, female officers that would join, they would have to willingly try and push the boundaries that they're comfortable with to try and fit in, and they'd have to extend themselves into that. And then when that comes to then policing, a football game, especially when you're going in there, as Christian said, some officers are going in there looking for a fight. If that's the culture that you're around, that's what you have to buy into if you want to stick around, if you want to make this your career, you want to get in, you want to advance your career and things like that. So, I think it's sort of the whole problem boils down to, yes, that early period in the mid 20th century from the 70s through to the 90s where it was very white and it was very racist, and that now has cultivated this culture of being hyper masculine, extremely toxic, and quite aggressive as well. So yeah, it's the culture of the institution as a whole is not in a great place. And yeah, James did mention that, you know, they are doing things to try and address it, but the issue is that it's sort of like with football in a way. Quite interestingly, there's some nice parallels to it where you do still have some of those old egos sticking around, right, who are still in those positions of power, or who still have influence, and you're sort of still fighting this really long drawn out battle of attrition against them to make meaningful change. You know, so let's hope that the things that they're starting to put in place, the policies and things like that, are going to help and are going to work, because we've seen, at least here in South Australia over the last 12 to 18 months, you know, a lot of deaths within the police force, in terms of suicides. We've seen a lot of people leaving the police force because of the culture that exists. So you know, it's a big issue that needs to be addressed, if not just for, you know, making football you know, a safer thing to attend, but also to make sure that there's a workable environment that the police officers can exist within. Because, you know, without a functional or competent police force, it's not great for society as a whole.
So, Christian, the advice that James gave in terms of how we can affect change came down to the fact that police are governed by two things. One is the media, which on count one, that's what we're trying to do. And number two is money. And specifically how James said people can affect that is by challenging the police on things that they do, right? So it can be obviously a very scary thing to do because, as you're saying, Jacob, we're supposed to consider the police as the best of society, and they're the people in charge, and they're the people we're supposed to trust. But obviously they get things wrong. And one of the other thing he said was that if they can get through something by BSing it a little bit, then sometimes that's what they'll do. So police wear cameras these days. If you get wrongfully charged with something, his advice was to challenge it, and then if you were successful, the police have to pay your legal fees, and that builds up, and then that can begin to get noticed. I guess it's a very scary thing to do. A lot of people don't even know their rights and what they are and aren't allowed to do. They probably don't know if they're being wrongfully mistreated. But I guess it's part of our responsibility to spread that discussion and I guess trying to empower people a little bit to do what they can.
Yeah, definitely. The least we can do is encourage people who have witnessed it, or, you know, been impacted individually by, you know, abuse from police officers or whatever, racism, whatever it is. Because yeah, like you mentioned, it can be scary to all of a sudden, you know, report the police on an instance, and you're probably thinking to yourself, like, the police can sort of dodge their way out of it, this way or the other, and that's probably what sort of, I guess, detracts people from doing that, right? And you mentioned the media as well. That's, yeah, another reason why this is occurring. I mean, you see, they obviously mentioned the media, you know, having a big influence on the public perception, you know, of sort of this fan behavior and whatnot. And that's why I mentioned, you know, what I meant before when I mentioned that was in terms of the public trusting the police more than the active fans. I'm saying that as in terms of, you know, if a regular person is just watching the news, for example, and they're not a football fan, who are they more likely to believe, the police officer or the active fan? And when they're watching these images of a flare, for example, then of course they're going to think, oh, well, this isn't right. This is, you know, an ugly scene or whatever. So yeah, that's the point I was trying to come across before, but completely understand where Pallady was coming from there. Definitely 100% accurate. And yeah, I guess we are the media. Again, like you said, Lockie, but we can only play, you know, as much as a role as, you know, anyone else coming into the scene. So yeah, it is prickly. A lot of things have to align to really ensure that it does get better. Because as James mentioned in the podcast, it's not just a quick fix solution. You know, the APL, everyone has to come together and, you know, really take these allegations seriously and try and come to some sort of conclusion.
So in terms of some specific recent examples, Pallady, we've seen two recent Melbourne Victory games, the Derby about, I think it was close to a month ago now, and was it the Western Sydney Wanderers game, or the Sydney FC game with the Cove as well? Sections of both the home and away active support had their concessions taken away from them by police and or stadium security, or police acting on the instructions of stadium security. The suggestions that we've heard are because flares have been lit at different points. Maybe they're members of the active support, maybe they're not, maybe they're just individuals. But that collective punishment has come, and that is obviously affecting the quality of the product of football, and it's affecting fan experience as well. In that situation, like, what would you say? Because it's so tricky, because the Northern Terrace leadership obviously decided to stage a walkout, and that was how they decided to essentially form a protest. Is it then being, going to the integrity units and the ombudsman that the police are governed by, and trying to go to the people that are just supposed to be enforcing the police? What actively should people be doing?
It's a very loaded question to answer, because on one hand we discussed this on Monday's episode, where, and I think Jacob and I, and I think to an extent as well you, Lockie, we sort of all agreed to an extent that you do the wrong thing, the only way that people seem to listen is collective punishment. Now, whether that's fair or not is, that's a discussion for another day. But I mean, we all know that flares are illegal at football games. Don't bring them. Don't do them on the march.
They're illegal, full stop.
Exactly.
like anywhere.
Like, it's maritime, emergencies only. But so we know they're illegal, but there's also nothing stopping anyone from going into BCF and getting one. Just like here in New South Wales, for an example, privately owned e-scooters are illegal, but that doesn't stop them being sold in JB Hi-Fi, and I can go in and spend $1,000 right now and get one. But I can't technically, legally ride it on New South Wales roads, footpaths, anything like that, bar my own private property, which is about the size of a needle in a haystack. So but that's the point. It doesn't stop these things from being sold. And so that might be the only way people will listen, but at the end of the day, that's also not fair to punish the collective for the actions of one person. Especially if that person isn't even associated with, with the active support group. So it's very tough to sort of strike that fine line, strike that fine balance. But I'd ask the question, I'd answer your question with the question overall, is why do we need European-style active support in Australia? And I say that when I look at the extremes, right? We don't need, we don't need the bashings, right? And that was something that was brought up on this podcast as well. We don't need that sort of thing. We don't need the flares. We don't need, we don't need a lot of things. We need people to sing together, chant, have fun, have a good time, and get behind their team, right? I kind of use if you have a look at the way that a lot of the Asian active support works, right? It's choreographed, it's all that sort of things. And I'm not saying we need to go to that extreme, but they have the drums, they have the chanting, they have the clapping. Is there any reason that we can't just have that? And I'm not saying that, we don't need the flares, we don't need, all that sort of extra stuff. The marches are what they are. Sometimes they have a negative impact, sometimes they have a positive impact, and I think overall it's fine. But, is there any reason we need all that extra stuff? And the answer is no, it's just people trying to be like Europe. And I don't think we need that here in Australia.
Can I just answer that real quick? I might be making the same point you're going to make, Lockie, but I think that's the double-edged sword with the way that Australian football is, right? In that, you mentioned it earlier, Lockie, it's such a multicultural game here in Australia, and large parts of that are from European countries with strong fan cultures of, that sort of ultras style, right? From places like Italy, Greece, Serbia, Croatia, those Central and Eastern European countries where that is a big part of football support. So in getting all of the benefits of having people from those communities coming to Australia to help build the game, it's also left that rather unsavoury aspect of that's the style of football fanaticism that they know and that they're used to, and that they have then passed on to their children and their children's children, etc. So I think it's kind of the double-edged sword there of we've got all the benefits of having these communities helping grow the game, but simultaneously, it's kind of unfortunate because they have brought potentially unsavory aspects of fan culture across. But I'm not pinpointing those groups in particular, by the way. That's not what I'm trying to say. I just think that maybe that could be part of why is that there is such a big European influence on the game here, which is why we're seeing European styles of fans. But I don't know, maybe you're going to make a different point, Lockie?
Well, you've answered that well. I think one positive they want to bring up off the back of that is that a lot of these recent events, the supporter groups, when they've come out and talked about it, they've all been very clear that they have been appreciative of the support given to them by the A-League and by the clubs themselves. There was a time about 10 years ago where that was the distinct opposite, right? So at the very least, it appears that the clubs are doing a better job of backing their active support. And, active support, as we talked about many times, is the reason that makes this code so attractive compared to the very competitive sporting market that we have in Australia. All of us here right now, all of us listening, we all love the game of football, but we also love showing up to a big derby with packed stands, with active support singing at each other. And I don't want to get drawn into saying European style or anything like that, because I think there are people that go for the good intentions. And I think just like we've talked about with the police, there are people that turn up in sections of active support with bad intentions. And we saw that with the Melbourne Derby invasion, right? There were people there, specific football supporters that wanted to go there for a fight to cause trouble and just get amongst things. So this is another reason why I'm strongly against the collective punishment, because you have people like that want to stir up trouble, want to just, go in. I'm trying not to swear. I'm trying not to turn this into A-League off there. Try and just make stuff happen. How long is it before, a fan of one group puts on an opposition shirt and walks in and throws a flare and gets all their stuff banned, right? Like, it's just, if you have people that are registered that, they're part of the North Terrace or the RBB or the Cove or whatever, whoever, then, okay, there is a level, I know, again, I'm not part of active support, but I'm aware that there is some level of self-governance in there. So, Christian, if that's the case, then there's some responsibility on the active support there. But apart from that, it needs to be dealt with a lot more delicacy for me.
Yeah, I mean, you said that they were football fans. I don't think they are football fans, the ones who go in there with bad intentions, because it's like, you're doing nothing but sabotaging the game. What are you trying to achieve out of the invasion, the pitch invasion, for example? So, that's where I stand on it. But yeah, Jacob summed it up perfectly in terms of that European aspect where you've got, immigrants coming into Australia and they've been brought up in that culture, haven't they, of a particular style of supporting your club. And in this country here, in terms of the police, the topic that we're talking about, they see a flare and it makes headlines, around the country. It's just terrible. It's just like the end of the world. Whereas, the average fan or an active supporter would think to themselves, how is that actually making news? Because we see it all the time in Europe. Like, why is that considered a crime? Right? It's different values and different perspectives that we've got to take into consideration. And it's like, where do you draw the fine line? Because, like you mentioned, there's people in there who you can't trust and they just want to go to the games and cause trouble, right? And it's like, how do you police that as well? So, like, there's so many different variables here you've got to, try and sort out. But in the end, I don't think there is like a perfect solution to suit all parties, really.
I just want to play devil's advocate real quick. Sorry, Paletti, for
No,
jumping
okay. You
in,
go first, and I'll go after.
Yeah, it's one example of something similar. It really springs to mind for me being English, and that was hooliganism in the 70s and the 80s. And it was really, really bad, a massive, huge problem. Obviously culminated in the Heysel Stadium disaster. 30-odd fans were killed in a European Cup match between Liverpool and Juventus, I believe it was. And Margaret Thatcher, divisive figure at best, but her approach to it was, hooliganism is awful, let's get rid of it. How do we do that? we've got to be as tough as possible on it. So, it worked because it's now not an issue in English football, right? There
Is
are a lot
it?
of, well, I mean,
You have to look at the Euro final a few years ago, right, in Wembley.
yes, but that's the like
I think what
okay,
you're trying
not
to
in
say,
the
Jacob, is
domestic league.
yeah, it's not an
In
issue in
the
the
domestic
Premier
leagues,
League and
yeah,
to an
yeah.
extent the Championship. If
Sure.
you go down to some of the lower leagues, and I know Millwall do get painted with a bad brush, but like the Millwalls of the world.
But even there, it's
It
not
happened in the
really a
Champions League
problem for
final
them.
a few years ago, didn't it? Liverpool and Real Madrid.
I think that was a ticketing issue, wasn't it, where they were sold tickets that weren't
Or if you count that
they
being
didn't
like
go.
outside
But
the
anyway,
stadium causing
basically the idea is that basically it was the hooliganism was eliminated from the English game, and the way that was achieved was she actually set up a war cabinet to tackle. It was basically a war on football hooliganism, and it was harsher punishments, stronger sentences, more policing. So, I mean, just to play devil's advocate, is that this idea of collective punishment, harsh punishment, it has worked before in the past. It's not a favourable tactic by any means, but it is effective. And I think that's the issue that we're up against, right, is that it is effective, and the police know that it will be because they've got more funds, more resources, more support than football fans do. It's almost a strong-arming thing of well, they're just going to keep doing it until football fans break. And yeah, I just think that's what football fans are up against at this point in time, is that the police think that this is the best way to move forwards with it. And I do agree with you, Lockie, like you said, that collective punishment isn't the way to go, right? And there is a delicacy that needs to be had in these with these situations. But it seems that the general consensus among those in charge and those in control is that this is the best way to approach it because it's worked in the past. We know that, well, we've got more support, we've got more funds, more resources to be able to go at this harder, and eventually the football fans will have to give in. I think that might be part of the problem as well.
I agree with what you're saying, Jacob, and this sort of builds in nicely to where I was going to go with Christian, is to where do you draw the line? Because on one hand, that did work in England, Jacob, and it sort of gives but that having that here would take away everything that sets our game apart.
Yeah.
In terms of what attracts the neutral, right? As you said, Lockie, there's nothing better than going to a derby where you've got both sets of actors going at each other. Everyone's the intensity's high for the full 90 minutes. It's what made the Sydney derby such an attractive ticket in town, where you had people travelling in from Perth and New Zealand and overseas because they wanted to be at this game, right? There's a reason that on a lot of football fans' bucket list is a game like Boca versus River because of the atmosphere and everything like that. But where to draw the line, and I think one of the things that is often criticised about the A-League is there's no promotion, there's no relegation, there's none of that, and there's one other league in the world that has that, and that's the MLS. And there's one thing that a lot of MLS clubs get right is their active support. Two examples that spring to mind to me are the 3252 for LAFC and a new expansion side in it's Austin FC. What Austin have done in just a short couple of years for their active support is nothing short of amazing, and the 3252 are the same from the moment they came in as an expansion side, but even then when they were Chivas USA, just a lot of for me, that sort of gives the best of both worlds, where you get the great scenes, you get the chanting, you get that sense of community that the active support all tries to provide with each other, that you're there for the team, it's 90 minutes, but you're also there for yourselves to an extent. It brings all of that together without the flares, without the fighting, without any of the, the nasty stuff, which is what the police ultimately want to drive out. And yes, there's, as we talked off the top, there are a lot of issues within the police force where for some people that's not going to be enough, and that is what it is. But for the most part, a lot of them just want to get rid of the nasty stuff so they can go to the media and they can say, yeah, we've kicked this stuff out of football, but you still get those intense scenes there. And I know that the cop in the podcast brought up the idea of safe smoke, and I know that's been trialed in the past and hasn't been successful in the A-Leagues, but I genuinely think it's time to give safe smoke I go again, and this is sort of where I was getting with the MLS point as well, is that's all safe smoke. That's not flares. And so you get these great atmospheres, and I'm not sure if it's beyond any sort of ability, Lockie, but running some footage over here would be great if you could, just of like the publicly available footage of like the 3252 and everything like that, because I think, for those who haven't seen it before, being able to show them what that looks like, because you put those scenes side by side with the Sydney Derby and everything like that, and if I didn't know where that was in the world, you could have told me that was an A-League game and I'd believe you.
So I want to pick up on one thing you said in there, is that, most police would be satisfied with kicking out the really bad stuff. I think I disagree with that, and I think that's one thing James said as well. One of the questions was, out of a percentage, how many, of the police force actively dislike football. He said something like 90-95%. Now, he did classify with part of that is probably people who are just indifferent and don't care, but that is still a very large number, right? And so, yes, the fights they're a rarity, right? We got to set the levels here. When the Derby invasion happened, there were harsh punishments that fell on Melbourne Victory. That was a collective effort. That's not individuals being idiots, right?
Yeah.
That was good. There were strong financial repercussions. The OSM at the time had to disband. We have still to this day 3 rows of seats at the front of the active supporter tarped off to keep them away from the pitch. They now have an actual kind of stand rooted into that section where the capos can be and be a little bit more safe in standing. So in that situation, harsh punishments were handed out. But for the situation we were talking about with the recent games and simply a flare being lit, the levels to this are so different. And yes, again, we know they're illegal in Australia, but in terms of the danger, it's minuscule in comparison to the other things we're talking about. So I think for a lot of police, the impression that I got from that interview is that it goes a lot further than that. And this is part of the public perception of football, being that immigrants game and just being different from the stereotypical AFL, NRL footy fan, and just seeing football, Christian, as a different world. And I think long term, obviously, we talked about a couple of the specific solutions that James offered, but long term, it's about, I guess, educating not just police, but the general public and everyone about football, and not it being this kind of scary, devil you don't know, rather than the things that go on at AFL and NRL games, which is the devil you do.
Yeah, exactly. I think as well, it's important that the clubs gather together and have these meetings with the police, right? We saw a couple of instances last season, for example, the Wanderers, when they had a couple of those scenarios play out with the RBB, and the public outrage about how the police treated them. And I think they got together and they sort of, some sort of agreement to sort of patch things up. But just to have that bit of understanding between the club and the police, because the police, some of these police aren't football fans, some of them or most of them. I don't know the percentage of it, but if they see, I don't know, for example, a flare or an activity supporting, a club that you'd see in Europe, but they're not particularly they don't see in an AFL NRL match, for example, then they're going to have a different perception of how to tackle that, right? And that's where you get this miscommunication and this different treatment, and it's where active fans are saying, "Oh, hold on, what? We haven't really done anything wrong, right?" So I think it's just that getting that understanding intact between everyone, I think, is really important. Whether that's the APL's responsibility or the clubs itself to try and sort that. I don't know, but something has to happen in that regard, in my opinion.
All right. Final question on this, Jack. I'm going to go to you. Just pick at your legal brain a little bit. Just in terms of actionable things that people can physically do, if something is happening at a game of football, should they be thinking about, recording, collecting evidence, having things to say and present, and then who do you present those things to?
Yeah, recording is a huge thing. Obviously, you mentioned that police have body cams and stuff, which is a really, really good thing now to have those things, because it does eliminate the likelihood of wrongful convictions, but it only eliminates the likelihood if you do actually challenge them. So yes, if you're a witness, a bystander, whatever, do collect evidence, see if you can somehow get in touch with the person who has been involved, right? If you can, that would be extremely helpful, because then you've got the evidence there to help them out. But if you're actually involved in it yourself, and James made a lot of these points. It's things like get the officer's name and their badge number first of all, so that you know who you to include in any report you might make, and then you don't go to the courts, because the police will typically fight you tooth and nail in the courts, again because of that thing I was saying, where they have more resources and more money. They're quite happy to just keep pushing until people can no longer afford or warrant to keep up the fighting courts, fold, plead guilty, and then the police get an easy conviction, right? You go to the ombudsman, and the ombudsman, for those who don't know, is a regulatory body, kind of works like a tribunal does, where they're not a court, but they can help out when you have been wronged with something, right? So if you're having a rent dispute with your landlord, you take them to the tribunal, and the tribunal can go, you can't charge them 50% more this month for no reason. They can just pay their normal amount for rent, right? The ombudsman kind of does the same, where it looks at decisions that the police have made, and it takes all of the evidence, and because it's independent to the police force, there's none of those inherent biases that come through based on the culture or the history of the organisation, right? So it's a clean slate, and it's a chance to challenge them without the cost of court. You don't have to get a lawyer. You can represent yourself and not be underhanded by the processes. So yeah, if you feel you've been wronged, like I said, name and badge number so that you know who to involve in it, and you go to the ombudsman and you say, here's the person who has accused me of this, because you'll be issued probably with a summons or some other sort of order from the police officer. Here's all the evidence I've got that would suggest otherwise. But usually what actually will happen is they'll go to the police force and they'll say, justify this. Right, and if you know that you've done nothing wrong and that they've just strong-armed you into something, they will cave in, it'll get wiped, no problems. And then if it is in the courts already, as you mentioned, Lockie, a good lawyer will go, all right, we'd like our legal fees paid for all of this because we've just wasted our time here. The police have wasted our time. So there are ways around it, and it's things that people don't know. And that's the important thing, I think, is that that's one thing we can do, even with a limited audience, is we can get the word out there that there are ways to approach this that aren't going to court and spending a lot of money and then ending up super poor and in a position where you just have to cave in, right? You can go and you can challenge this at the ombudsman, and you can get a fair result. And I think that that's something that football fans really need to focus on, is that there are ways around this, and it's something I'd love to see clubs and these supporters groups do. Again, a bit like you, Lockie, I'm not massively into the active support scene. Not that Adelaide United necessarily. I mean, the Red Army's great, but it's not like the North Terriers or the Cove or the RBB, right? And there's really good connections between the Red Army and Adelaide United, the club, as well, which helps. But I'd love to see this sort of information provided by clubs to these fan groups and saying, guys, let your members know that there are ways that they can challenge these things, because that was something back in 2015 with that article that came out with the 193 fans or whatever. A big part of that was that they didn't challenge these things because they didn't know that at the time there wasn't an avenue to, but there is an avenue to challenge these things, right, through the ombudsman now. So go and do it if you can, right, because it means that we're going to avoid situations like that again, which was something that really killed the momentum that the active support had in this country at the time. So yeah, the more that clubs and fan groups can get this information out to people, the better.
All right, brilliant. We're going to transition into talking about some actual football now. But
I thought the podcast episode finished. Wasn't that it? I thought
we're done. Shout out to the Suited and Booted boys. The link to the episode, if you haven't seen it already, will be in the description of this one. They did a great job with that, and they've been doing a really great job for a little while now with what they're doing to promote the game. So shout out to them. It's really good. But there was a game of A-League football in midweek. We're already 40 minutes in, so we're going to have to move through this a little quickly than maybe what we thought. But the final game, Paletti, of this summer of football, these midweek kind of games, Western United versus Central Coast, another very windy day out in Tarniet. Noah Botic on the score sheet again. He's been the talk of the town. He scored from range a couple of weeks ago. He scored with the head here. Another little reference, got suited up as well with the celebration. With all this talk of people going away to Europe, it's hard to see why his name might not be next on the list.
I mean, he'd certainly suit certain countries in Europe. But I mean, I love how you I love how you put this as like, and I understand this is not your thing, this is more the A-League thing, is the final midweek fixture of the summer of football, and yet we've had a rescheduled A-League women's game next Tuesday, been delayed 24 hours because of heat. It's not part of the summer of football. So I just thought that was funny. But yeah, I mean, look, this game was fun. I think it was the perfect way to end the midweek fixtures. It was fun. There's all the chaos in the first half, and then there was the will they, won't they from both sides in the second half, and we'll go straight into some of the. You've got it here, some weird goals.
Yeah.
Ben Garuccio's free kick. I mean, to equalise it, like I said, Lockie said this, not Lockie. Will said this in the group chat that like there's no way the keeper should be conceding from there, and I agree. And then I said that that wouldn't have looked out of place on the pitch in Gaul right now during day one of the test match between Australia and Sri Lanka, and it wouldn't have. The spin on that ball was fantastic. It was a perfect free kick from Garuccio, even though it probably shouldn't have found its way past the goal line.
All right, let's classify the use of the word perfect there. I think for the left, look, the difficulty for the goalkeeper with this free kick was that it was close right in the center of the pitch, and you had a left footer and a right footer. So what PH Cullen did is he put his wall directly in the middle, but then he biased to one side, the side that would naturally suit Angus Thurgate with the right foot, right? So, Garuccio's played the odds and said, I have the angle on the near side. All he had to do was get it in the right third of that goal. And if he's aiming for anywhere in the right third, then the shot was perfect. If he was aiming for the corner, it wasn't even close. But he just got it over PH Cullen. He's wrong-footed, and then, they end up with a goal. I thought the other really weird one, Christian, the free kick from Docker that ends up, of course, if you have a long-range free kick like that ends up in the net, it's weird, first of all. But I also love that Nathan Paul goes within about 2 inches of handballing it, because he's trying to block the sun out of his eyes so he can actually see it, and just misses the whole thing.
Yeah, that was crazy. I'm thinking, what the hell is going on here? But that wasn't even the only crazy miss. I saw the Ryan Edmondson chance that he missed was from like 2 yards out when he volleyed it into the ground and went over the bar. It's like it was just one of those crazy games where all these events happen. It's like, what is going on? Like, I've been away from the tennis for 3 weeks. It's like I'm just trying to catch up, and just watching that game. It's like, what is going on? My brain is just fried. So no, like Bloody said, it was really entertaining, and a lot of stuff going on, but for West United to get a draw, probably a bit disappointing, considering their recent form as of late. And on the contrary, the Mariners as well, not performing at their best. So, I thought at the end, probably a draw did probably suit both teams in terms of the performances.
I thought the Mariners were good value for this. That move, Hayne Eames, the 16-year-old, 2 consecutive starts now, that through ball into Paul and then the Wits ball across. Really good stuff. So positive for the Mariners. Never easy, I don't think it's going to be out in Tarneit. They've got a good run of fixtures out there, so we'll see how they can progress, playing a lot of home games, which is very cool. Real home games for the first time in their history. Let's move into some transfer chat. The big news coming off on Thursday, Paletti, Jed Drew. He's been rumoured for about a week now. We know he's off to Austria. He has played his last game for MacArthur. He is already on a flight, probably landed by now, but he is off, and that represents now a window for MacArthur where they've lost a lot of players and they haven't really replaced them. They've brought in Peter Makrilos, who is an Australian 29-year-old centre-back who's never actually played in the A-League. He's gone from Greece to Lithuania to Denmark to Sweden, and recently 2 years in the Korean second tier. So first of all, Jed Drew and his quality moving abroad, but then secondly, MacArthur and their position in the league at the moment, having lost so many players.
Yep, Mr. Potato Head Son certainly gets a very good and well-deserved move, but I can't help but hark back to Milo Stoyovsky's comments that it might be a little bit too early for him. I mean, he's one of those players that's been on the radar of people for a very long time, and I've been asking, regularly at press conferences, about Jed Drew and his progress. I'm pretty sure it goes back to the days of All Night Dwight, before moving into, Stoyovsky as, the current coach. Has been there for quite some time now. And it was always, he just needs to build in. He just needs to get consistent game time, and is sort of struggling to break in, and he's broken in, and he sort of had kind of like the breakout 6 months here. It was sort of like, Yeah, sort of on the periphery last year of that breakout, and then 6 months of breakout, and it's enough to get a move. But I mean, there's also a club that just hold Area FPL who's had all of 4 game time
Yeah.
worth of
Yeah.
minutes. So it's there's something MacArthur are doing right, but I can't help but wonder if this might be a tad too early for Jed Drew. But we'll have to wait and see here. On the flip side, MacArthur are screwed. There's no other way to put it. You've got here. Are we worried about them from here? I am genuinely concerned that MacArthur, who are currently sitting in 4th place on 24 points, are going to miss finals. There's 6 points between them and 10th place on the ladder. That's not a lot of wiggle room in the A-League. I think they have to go into Auckland now and get at least a draw, if not all 3 points, to sort of keep them in the driver's seat here. Because otherwise, 1 loss turns into 2 losses, turns into 3 losses, and then the Mariners get a win. The Mariners get 2 wins, or Wellington get 2 wins on the trot, and suddenly those positions are flipped. And then with 8 games to play, keeping in mind MacArthur, as I brought up on Monday, are still the only side yet to have a bye. So they've got less games than everyone else does as we hit the run home towards the end of the season. And, 2 games out of the 6 with 8 weeks to play. Oh, and they have 2 less games to play than everyone else. Oh, I wouldn't want to be in that locker room. That's a that looks like it would be a very haunting place to be. And I don't think Stoyovski's in any danger here, but with the amount of key talent that has left the club, I'd be hoping, if I was Stoyovski, that I've got assurances from the board that I'm in no risk of losing my job, because it's Ari FPL, it's Oliver Jones, that's Jed Drew, that's 3 transfers out this window already.
Yeah.
We already went over the Aslanigic situation, so that's 4 players gone. You've then got Franz Deli, Oliver Randazzo, Dean Bosniak, and reserve goalkeeper Alex Robertson going off with the young Socceroos in a couple of weeks' time, who could be gone for up to a month. That's a 30-year squad right there, gone in at the drop of a hat. Oh boy.
Yeah, they're going to be in for it for sure. I'm interested, Jacob. I hope I'm right about this. When I was thinking about this Jed Drew transfer, firstly, he's been incredible this season. I think he's the best crosser of the ball, number 1, and his all-round product has improved dramatically. But in terms of the context of young kids going overseas, at least for me, because we're seeing so many go at the moment, I've noticed myself thinking about it a little differently. And I think when some of these bigger European countries, even more South America is probably a better example, because a lot of them end up playing in Europe. The perspective over there is it's another one of thousands, maybe not thousands, but hundreds going overseas. And eventually some of them will work out, some of them won't. But because in Australia, in the last, probably forever since the golden generation, because we've had so few people going over and being really successful, we've been writing the story of every single one of them, and it's ever the more disappointing when they don't turn out. But now we're getting so many go overseas. It's like, okay, they've got their move. If a third of them kick on and do really well, then that's a win. And I'm maybe not quite as attached to the individual stories as much. Obviously, you got Nesta, which is a massive one, but pretty much everyone else, it's like, awesome, you've made the next step, and now I'm going to wait for the next 20 to 30% of you that make the step after that, and then it's going to get really exciting.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. It's a case of teams now starting to embrace developing their own players, right, and not viewing it as misfortune when they eventually leave, right? Because that's the reality of football, is players are always going to chase the next step up, right? They're going to want bigger and better and more money and more opportunities. And, Australia is really just a stepping stone in that journey. So yeah, clubs have embraced that recently, and we've spoken about how we're seeing more young players getting minutes in the A-League. Managers are backing them. They're then translating that support into good performances, and then they're getting these moves. So yeah, I like the comparison to South America, because it is kind of like a very, very small version of South America, in the fact that the more that you can pump out there, the more likely one of them will hit eventually, right? And then when they do, that's massive for the rest of the players then, because hang on, you've got that Australian player and I mean, we've kind of spoken about this, right? We're slowly raising the floor in terms of the value of the players here. When some of these players start to, kick on and do big things in their career, that's only going to then help the clubs here in Australia because the players are going to be valued even higher. But it's also going to help the players because they're going to be scouted earlier and more often and more frequently from more countries and more clubs and be given more opportunities. So, yeah, I'm with you where I think this sort of almost exodus of players that's happening at the moment in the A-League in this January window is a good thing in the long term, because while it's difficult to keep up with every single one of them, and a fair chunk of them probably won't pan out, there are those that will, and that's going to be huge for player development and for football in Australia in the coming decades. So yeah, it's a good sign to see so many of them going, and it also is a feeling of a lot of them are leaving very early. Obviously, Arieth Piol is a great example of that, but even Jed Drew, he's had sort of half of a good season now, where it's like in the past everybody was going, oh, it's the wrong move to move so early, oh, you don't want to do that, you want to get some seasons. Like, people were even talking about it with Nestri last season, right, where they're like, oh,
Yeah.
should he stay in Adelaide another season? Now it's a non-factor, right? Because we're like, it's almost like as fans we have faith in these players that, hang on, we know there's talent there. They've just got to go and work hard and take the opportunities that are given to them, and they will succeed. And it sort of feels like that at the moment as well, where it doesn't feel like these players are doomed to fail when they go over there. It feels like they've been set up for success. They put themselves in these positions to have these opportunities. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens with this current crop of guys coming through, because yeah, they're all extremely talented. We've seen that from what they've done in the A-League. So yeah, hopefully some of them can kick on over in Europe and really help out Australian football.
As I've told you all a couple of times, I was a little bit worried, to be honest, at the start of the season, that because we'd have this kind of cream off the top that have been taken away, that maybe there wouldn't be so many good players behind them. But I think they've proven so far this year that is not the case. I don't know the numbers in specifics, but this January window has to be one of the biggest the A-League has ever seen in terms of a mid-season transfer window. Hayden Matthews, 2.5 million, and all the numbers that are going around. Arieth Piol, Jedra, it's just like, this has to be very good. So very encouraging for the league.
I'm sure
Christian,
Andy
let's go to
Howe's got
Melbourne.
that in his little notebook somewhere.
And
Yeah.
how probably that. Andy, sure. You reckon they're just giving him the figures on the side? It's like, don't tell anyone. But just for your personal collection,
Yeah.
personal stats, you can have the transfer fees. That'd be great. Christian, let's go to Melbourne Victory. They've boosted their defensive stocks finally with the arrival of Lachlan Jackson. Never trust anyone with two first names. He's coming off 4 years with Suwon Blue Wings in K1, after a touch under 100 games with the Jets as well before that. So we kind of talked about Milos Degenek and Thomas Deng being their two targets, along with the Wanderers, actually. But in comes Jackson when those two options are off the table.
Yeah, and he's obviously got that experience under his belt, playing his football with the Newcastle Jets. Played a few years with Suwon Blue Wings out in career, and I think I believe he's played centre back a lot of the time in career, but he can also play as a fullback. And I think for Victory, they need that bit of versatility in the back line, considering the departure of Jason Guerrier a couple of weeks ago. I think, they really need to stock up in that area. And they thought, this kid can play in a couple of positions. He's 29 years of age, got, obviously a fair chunk of experience already. So I think get someone in who knows the style, who can really fit into the system that Victory want to play in terms of defensive aspect, and hopefully he can gel pretty quickly, because I think he's definitely going to be needed from now until the end of the season, that's for sure.
And then we've talked about Ryan Teague a little bit as well, and the fact that the Chinese Football Association were going after him and trying to convince him to play for the national team. All quiet on that front, but there were also some rumours going around that CSL teams were looking at him. Kevin Muscat's Shanghai Port was one of the clubs that was mentioned most. Per Joey Lynch, Victory Director of Football John DeLuca denied any contact whatsoever, formal or otherwise, with any Chinese club for the services of Ryan Teague. So he appears to be safe for now, at least in a club sense. Bloody Sydney FC, Alex Grant is rumoured to be signing with the club. That deal could potentially be locked up by the time you're listening to this podcast on the Friday. Wolfie alluded to the fact that they were hoping to have someone locked in on Friday, maybe not playing on the weekend, but definitely signed and announced. And Alex Grant is rumoured to be that name.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I can think that might be a negative about this is having two Grants in the back line.
Just gets confusing.
Grant's playing at centre back again. What are they doing?
But I mean, look, as far as centre back options go, or just defensive options in general, there's probably a lot worse that Sydney FC could do than Alex Grant. Particularly if they get anywhere near this permanent deal with Popovich, or even if they just extend the loan deal for another 6 months. Like, I don't know what the appetite of his K1 club is for that, but I mean, anything to sort of shore up the defensive stocks is going to be good for Sydney FC, even if it is only a temporary solution.
Absolutely. There is another Australian on their way to the English Championship. No, not Portsmouth this time around. 18-year-old Jalen Pearman from Perth Glory. He's represented Australia at under 17 and now under 20 level with the upcoming Asian Cup. He's on his way, so good for him. He's off another Australian in England. However, there's another bloke that has done one better and been signed to the English Premier League. Former Brisbane 17-year-old Ryland Brownlee with Crystal Palace. Now, the link here, my understanding, is that his agent, Craig Moore, who was a former Palace defender, brokered the deal. So he had a little training stint with Palace in December and obviously impressed enough to get a deal. So he'll go over there, Jacob, when he turns 18 in February. So it's one of those moves like Nesta. Can't go until you're 18 if you don't have a passport. So he has to wait a little bit. But another Aussie with a Premier League team.
Yeah, and Brisbane fans, I know, weren't all that pleased with him because they really rate him as a player. And obviously, I believe he was released actually earlier this season as well.
Yeah.
So, the Brisbane fans were unhappy at that point, and probably now even more unhappy that the club won't even see a fee for this. But it's a good step for him, a massive step, to be honest. Somebody who has come through that Brisbane youth system, has been one of the bright spots, and, can you blame him for wanting to get out of the environment at Brisbane? Not really. And yeah, it sucks for the club and the fans because they won't get to see him play for Brisbane. It sucks for the club because they won't receive any money for it. But for him as a player, it's huge. Now, we've seen similar sorts of things happen before. I know Johnny Yole was linked to Chelsea and he trialled with them about 3 or 4 times over the last few seasons, but has never quite managed to get the gig there. And with this being brokered by the agent, or at least rumoured to be brokered by the agent, there are question marks about how much, the Crystal Palace actually have faith in him or put their stocks in him versus how much do they just see this as a very, very low risk move that could pay off huge. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. And, we've seen in the past players make these gambles over into Europe and it not pan out. And Brownlee being one of those players who I personally haven't seen a huge amount of, it's difficult to say whether he'll sink or swim. But let's put our faith in him. It's a massive
one of the many.
One of the many. That's right, and it's a massive, massive move, right, to a Premier League club, especially one like Crystal Palace, who recently has been relatively stable, compared to a lot of teams that have been around the Premier League in the last few years. They seem to have their heads screwed on properly at that club. So it's a good environment to be heading to. A stark difference to Brisbane, I'm sure. So yeah, no, best of luck to him. That's a big move. Another Australian going over and playing in the English leagues. It's a bit reminiscent of that golden generation, isn't it? Where there were a lot of Aussies playing over in England. So starting, might be a sign of things to come.
Maybe.
Well, perhaps he could find himself, loaned out to say League One, for example, like Joe Gauchi has just done. It was announced earlier today that he's set to join Barnsley for the rest of the season. Lucky.
Christian, we saw Matt Ryan get his little move over. Now some competition for the Socceroos goalkeeping shirt.
I don't think there should be competition, to be quite honest. I think Gaucho should be the number one, and that's it. Move on.
All right, I will then. That's fine. Scott Neville is set to retire playing. The situation here is he's going to play game number 300 on the weekend, and then he will hang up the boots. Credit to him, recently returned from an ACL injury. He's fought all the way back, put his shift in for the Royal the last month or so, and will become just the 11th member of the 300 club, Paletti. So someone who has given a large portion of their career to the A-League, and he's going to get a nice way to sign off on the weekend.
I mean, Jacob just talked about, wanting to get out of Brisbane Roar. I mean, this is a bit extreme, isn't it?
Retiring mid-season.
No, look, That is a joke. That is a joke. Look, he's had a fantastic career. I mean, it's definitely a thing in women's football where you see a lot of players that come back from the ACL injuries, and they, in some cases they'll struggle. Some just pick on. But I mean, an ACL injury at his age is certainly no easy feat to return from. And I imagine that it might have been okay. We'll see how we go. Maybe I get to play out the rest of the season, but it seems clear that maybe his body just isn't what it used to be, and he sort of wanted to hit the 300 mark before hanging up the boots. And fair play to him. It's completely his choice. A great servant to the A-Leagues, and he will be missed.
Absolutely. All right. Football Australia have. Sorry, that is the end of the transfer chat. We're done now. That's all we know at this moment in time.
Football Australia are transferring in a new Matildas coach, are they?
They're going after some CSL local players. They have Australian parents, and they're going to bring them over. No, what they have done, Football Australia, is release their annual national participation report. Now, just like the police chat at the start, we're largely preaching to the choir here, but football is by far the number one team participation sport in Australia. That was backed up here. Total participation, even then, up 11%, which seems like quite an impressive number. A little over 1.91 million participants in 2024, I guess that would be. Women's and girls up 16%, registered coaches up 19%, and also volunteers up 26%, which I guess, Jacob, we know post Women's World Cup, a large influx in young girls wanting to play football, which is awesome. Facilities is one question, but also just the people to run those programs is another. So that's another encouraging part of that as well.
I love seeing the volunteer number going up by 26%. That's all, because they're the ones that, like, without them, there's no football in this country. You go to any local club and everyone there's a volunteer, from the people running the canteens to the people on the committee of the club to people who are just the kit men and the physios and things like that, and they're all just doing it because they love the sport and they want to be involved. And it's those people, even the referees are classed as volunteers. So it's things like these are the people we need in the game to help it continue to grow. So the fact that it's actually sort of over achieving in comparison to participants in terms of the growth, that's a great sign, because it means that don't expect this growth to stop anytime soon, because there's enough people there to support it and to continue to support it. I'm personally not surprised at all to see participation up, especially women's and girls, with the World Cup, with the support for the Matildas going through the roof and things like that. It's awesome to see, and it's something that we're seeing every year. Everybody's talking about more and more people are playing and involved in football, especially women and girls. It's becoming this big phenomenon in Australia. And yeah, you said sort of preaching to the choir. It was funny seeing all the comments on social media underneath it saying, cool, how about we get more funding now? And I think that is the general sentiment, is how can this be ignored? This absolute growth. There is such a gold mine for government support here that is completely untapped. So yeah, we've just got to keep pushing for it.
You sort of have to wonder, right? Like, those numbers are impressive, but you have to think, could they be bigger in terms of, like, if we had more investment, if we built more facilities, like, that could be so much bigger, right? Like, it's such a great number, but it could be like so much better at the same time. Like, that's the scary part of it, like how much potential we have over here.
And maybe we could get like half of them to be A-League supporters as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Bloody.
Yeah, no, they absolutely could be. I mean, you look at that 16% for women and girls. We know that clubs are still having to turn away because they don't have the facilities, because they're not being invested in, whether that's at council, state government, federal government level. And that's not surprising if anyone had have bothered to listen, because I know there were a lot of people in the lead up to the World Cup who said, this is what's going to happen. It's going to do this. And, I'm not saying correlation equal causation, but all I know is that everyone who, had a voice on any sort of committee or anything like that was warning that the Women's World Cup was going to rise participation numbers and that facilities needed to match. And then the government started to play catch up, and they haven't caught up far enough. And that, I know there was the $200 million that got spread around like 15 different sports, and football only got a portion of it, even though the money from the World Cup, it all came from football, and yet football's only got a small portion of that. So that as a topic of itself is a discussion for another day and probably another 40-minute to open up a podcast. But we are running out of time, so Lockie, take it away.
Thank you, Paletti. I look, another marker of this, the Australia Cup is beginning again for 2025. I think the first game is this weekend. Different states, as we're still in the preliminary rounds, are starting at different times. So yeah. I think almost all have done some of their draws, but maybe not. But the Football Australia seem very convinced that, again, they're going to break the record for the amount of participant clubs in the Australia-wide Australia Cup, which is awesome as well. A very cool competition. Yeah. Let's get in with a brief look ahead to round. Is it round 18 or are we like skipping 4 rounds again?
No, it's 17.
Oh my.
17, that's right. Sorry, we did this on YouTube the other day.
Yes, we had this discussion.
You have a go at me giving wrong predictions now. You can't even predict the right round, right?
Oh, okay. Well, you had the time to go through your phone and look up the number and think of something. Anyway, at least that clip's getting some good mileage. We've got to use it twice, which is good. In the teams, some big news. Douglas Costa has been included in Ufuk Talay's squad to take on Adelaide. Talay says he's still not 100%. Don't expect him to start, but he could be good enough just to play a little part. Of course, they've got the derby the week after as well, so that will be absolutely the priority for him. Let's get into the weekend look. We have a full boat tonight, so I'm just going to sit back and relax. Partly because we're already an hour and 5 minutes in, partly because I haven't had time to think about mine. So, Jacob, I'm going to handball to you. What is your burning question for round 17?
Can Victory carry their form forwards? Obviously, nice win for them in the Big Blue. They've been just a real non-factor under Arthur Dillis so far. It's a big chance for them to build from this performance and to go on and continue to get wins and get results. And, you know, they're up against Perth. You'd hope that they can get something from it, but this is Victory. So, you know, it's all about can they carry it forwards. For me, you know, for the sake of keeping things tight at the top, I really hope so, because it's been a really great battle in that top 6, 7 so far this season. And if some of those teams start to fall away, it's going to get a little bit boring perhaps. So, yeah, the more teams that can find form and continue to get results, the better.
Christian?
Mine is the other team, the Big Blue, and that's Sydney FC, whether they can respond against Adelaide this week. You know, winless in the past 3 games, coming off that 2-0 defeat against Victory. Like, they've been in a couple of these positions where we've asked that same question as, where can they bounce back? Are they capable? We know they've suffered from a couple of injuries throughout the course of the season, and they definitely haven't impressed us as much as we thought heading in, considering, you know, the performances they showed in Asia. And we thought, okay, they're definitely going to, you know, perhaps most likely run away with the league, but that hasn't been the case at all. So, you know, can they bounce back against a very impressive Adelaide side who, again, we haven't expected much from, you know, before the season. So, yeah, it'll be interesting at home. I think they really do need to win to stamp a bit of authority.
Bloody?
My burning question is, how do MacArthur perform against Auckland given their lack of a squad? We already talked about this earlier. Them either, you know, right now or over the next couple of weeks, they're going to be missing about a third of their squad for one reason or another. But I mean, it's the players that they've lost, and that last one today with Jed Drew just sort of really puts the icing on the cake, because he's been so crucial to their build-up this season. So how they perform without him is going to be massive. And I said earlier, I think MacArthur needs to get 3 points against Auckland. Going away to a side that's only lost once at home, I don't like it.
Quick little straw poll before we move on. I only need a yes or a no. A lot of people saying after Drew's transfer out that he was maybe in the running for a Johnny Warren medal if he continued this form going. Do you think he's in the top 3 of Johnny Warren contenders at the moment? Jacob, Christian, please.
Oh.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Top 3? Yes. Maybe.
I think depending on how the rest of the season plays
One
out,
word answer. One word answer.
Right now. How's he in the votes right now? Okay, there we go. All right. Maybe he's missing out on a Johnny Warren medal. Worst case scenario, Jacob.
This is not biased, and I didn't mean for it to be an Adelaide one, but Adelaide lose. And the whole reason is not that it would be Adelaide losing; it's that it would give Auckland a little bit of breathing room at the top. And I've absolutely loved seeing the title battle so far between Auckland, Adelaide, and City this season. It's been fantastic to watch because every game has had so much importance to it. I think if Adelaide start to drop away from this now and they lose here, gives, like I said, Auckland that breathing room, and it almost gives Auckland that chance to again try and extend themselves like they did early on in the season, and teams had to play catch up. Just to keep things close, keep things exciting. It would be fantastic for Adelaide to get a result. So yeah, if they lose, it would sort of put a bit of a dampener on how exciting things have been at the top recently.
Christian?
Central Coast to pick up a result against the Jets. So I just want this fixture to have a different result other than the Mariners win, because they've actually won the last 6 F3 derbies since 2022. So you don't typically want to see such a one-sided rivalry after a significant stretch of time, and hopefully the Jets can change the narrative and offer something different other than the same old story.
Fair enough, bloody.
Well, I've got 2 now since you're not going. I'll cover you here for your worst case scenario.
Thought we were supposed to cut down time.
No, we'll go with mine first. My worst case scenario is injuries to defenders. So many sides are lacking good defensive options. We saw Kai go down last week. I think the last thing that we need is more injuries to defenders. So using the no homers rule, we're allowed 1, but that's it. Touch wood, no defender gets injured. The other one I was going to come up with, which is something I didn't know until I looked at the rundown, is Douglas Costa comes on and gets injured again, or worsens his injury. I think that's a pretty worst case scenario for Sydney FC.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. That's probably the worst of the lot. Finally, to finish us off, a ping from distance, Jacob.
2 red cards in Brisbane and Wanderers. I don't know. Bring me chaos in that one, please.
Pretty random.
Yeah, that's a definition of a ping, right?
Yeah, I've got no basis for it. I just think it would be funny.
That's like an outside of the foot Trevella 45 yards on the wrong foot. Christian?
I'm not sure if this is more controversial than Paletti's preseason prediction placing Victory in 9th, but I've gone for the Glory to pick up a result at home against Victory. Call me crazy, but this is the definition of a ping from distance. In my book, the Victory historically just don't particularly travel as well in Perth as they do in other parts of Australia, which is obviously isn't a surprise. And yes, Victory are clearly in a much better position than this version of Glory, but I'm just sticking my neck out. If Jacob can put in a random sort of ping from distance, that's mine. So I'm going with that.
Of course, it took a Eli Adams screamer last time around to get the 3 points over in Perth. So, yeah, they don't do it easy. Paletti finishes off.
If Auckland can lose out west, anyone can lose out west. My ping from distance is Sydney and Adelaide draws a bigger crowd than the F3 derby. We know that when the Mariners are struggling, crowds turn away, and that's not anything that's unique to the Mariners. It's a problem with just Australian sports in general. When sides are struggling, fans don't turn up in this country. It's very much a winner's mentality. But this is a derby. The crowd should turn up. So I think if Sydney versus Adelaide, who, Sydney usually draw around 13, 14 at a minimum, the F3 can't outdraw that, then, oh boy.
Yep, no, that's an interesting one as well, because it's probably something that's a little more likely, but would still really hit you in the face if it happened as well. The derby not being the biggest attended game of a round. Fascinating. All right, that will do finally for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Christian, Paletti, Jacob, I never introed you, so I may as well not outro you either. Thank you very much for coming along. We're going to get out of this episode eventually. Thank you to everybody at home for tuning in. We appreciate your company as always. Again, shout out to the Suited and Booted Boys. Get around them as well. Listen to that episode of the podcast. We'll be back on Tuesday for another episode of your regular weekend A-League action. Finally, we're just back to 3 days a week. That's all we have. It's much easier to keep track of. We'll see you then. Thanks again for listening. Goodbye.